most well-known and influential artist in the history of Warhammer, John Blanche, is finally being honored with a miniature paint range filled with his hand-picked colors to match his iconic style. But the paint range is not being produced by Games Workshop, his employer of 46 years. Instead, he's partnered with the Army Painter? At this point, it's common knowledge that Games Workshop actively hides the creatives behind all of the great work that's done for Warhammer. Sculptors, painters, rules writers, heck, even their 2D artists are all shrouded in secrecy. But John Blanche has been an iconic part of Warhammer far before this current regime's strategy. His vision and artwork are the foundation for the grimdark world that Warhammer is today. You'd think that coming out with a paint set of his most treasured colors would be a no-brainer for Games Workshop. And after 46 years of service to the company and now retired, his paint set is now a reality. But Games Workshop didn't partner with him to make it. The Army Painter did. It's unfortunate to say, but I'm not shocked at all that Games Workshop couldn't find a way to make this product a reality. But I am happy that it exists because this is a benefit for all of us in the painting community. So let's dig into these colors with a proper grim dark subject, one of the new Death Riders from the Deathcore Krieg box that will be coming out soon. Games Workshop did send this over to me early, so thanks. John Blanche's color palette is most well known for his strong use of warm tones, things like terracottas and ochres, yellows, reds, and off-whites. And these colors are all here, but also included in the 20 paints across 2 volumes are a lot of interesting cold tones, desaturated greens, deep blues, as well as some interesting choices in speed paints and washes. And of course there's a rust effects paint, because it wouldn't be proper grimdark without rust. My plan today is to paint this model using only the colors in these paint sets. I'm not even going to add a pure black or a pure white here. I just want to see how well these colors harmonize together and if I can recreate my own version of that Blanche black magic. I'm just starting with a big synthetic brush, slapping undiluted colors over everything. I roughly blend them together where 2 colors meet, but I don't really have a plan on what colors are going where. My plan is to use all 20 of these paints on this one paint job, and that's usually quite a few more colors than I'd usually use on a single paint job, but I figure if these are good enough for one John, they're good enough for me. Fuck me, that's not the line. Because I figure if they're good enough for one John, they're good enough for all Johns. No, because I figure if they're good enough for one John, they're good enough for another. It's a joke because we got the same name. A couple of things that are important to share at this stage in the painting. First off, I'm not just painting within the lines here. Some sections I try to keep somewhat separated, like this handsy horsey's flesh in the rider. But it's far more important that we just slap down some really interesting base colors. We can refine the details later, but if this base layer is boring, our final product is more than likely going to be boring. I am experimenting with slapping some of the more vibrant colors around the model, having no idea if they will work or if they will even look good, but this is a way to challenge myself to integrate them later. Blanche's work often punches you in the mouth with its warm tones, and since I'm realizing I'm spending a lot of the time on this step using the cold colors from the set, jamming some random warm colors in is a visual reminder for me that I need to feature them more later. Another thing that I'm doing here is not worrying too much about what the final surface color is going to be for each thing on this model. For instance, his uniform is going to be a desaturated grayish blue, but I'm not just painting it that color here in this base coating step. The reason why is because I'm already seeing how these colors were purposely picked to work together. And as I'm realizing it, I'm losing the fear of layering on some orange or terracotta where I usually wouldn't. And this is really my first aha moment with this paint set. All of these colors were designed to work together. It takes the sometimes paralyzing decision-making process of color selection out of the equation. Because I put every color in the set on my palette, I just grab from whatever puddle catches my eye, or mix a few of the colors together and find a fun place to lay them on. I do try to respect the volumes and shapes across the figure, giving a bit of dimension through color, but I purposely keep using my large brush here because I don't want to get stuck in the weeds. Creating drama through color and setting up our initial volumes is much more important than worrying about any specific details of the model. Not only is this one of my favorite ways to distress while miniature painting, but it's also extremely versatile. You can take this starting point and boost the paint job really high if you want to invest a bunch of hours in the later refinement steps, or you can be much quicker about bringing in some quick highlights to get the model painted in just a few hours. And honestly, anywhere in between. You don't have to know how many hours you intend to invest on this, just have fun until it stops being fun, then stop painting. I mentioned I wanted to use all 20 colors here, and I do have the intention of creating some quick and dirty non-metallic metal on this piece, but I'm still going to use both of the metallic paints in this set. I'm just looking at these as base coats just like every other color I've base coated with so far. We're going to add more depth through washes and normal layers of paint over the top, but it adds a quirkiness to the piece, and I'm curious to see how it ends up. Now, all 20 of the colors in these two volumes are new to the Army Painter range. They don't exist in any of their existing products. Some come in as a 7th step in their usual 6 paint sets. Some stand on their own outside of those existing 6 paint sets. And the metallics, washes, speed paints, and Grim Rust Effect are all brand new as well. At first I thought the two speed paints, the turquoise and the dark red, seemed like oddballs in this set, but then I started using them to boost the warms and cold tones respectively, and they do a wonderful job of pushing the drama where you need it most. The washes work in a similar way with a lot more of a gentle touch. My favorite is definitely Grim Dark Shadow, which is a nasty, dirty dark wash that black lines details really well by still leaving a hint of a greenish brown muck. Now, I didn't do an all-over wash to any part of this model really, but I did tint some areas to kind of bring together the rougher blends, and even went over all the smaller bits like the pouches and the belts and the backpacks with a wash just to kind of bring the depth of those areas back together. The Voodoo shade actually does a really good job of pulling together all your warm tones over a blend to smooth them out without being overpowering to the work that you just did. All right, let's move on to the refining and highlight stage, and I had to redo my wet palette at this part because after putting all 20 colors on the palette and mixing them and messing around, my palette was an utter mess. Of course, I forgot to get footage of how messy the palette really was, but it's probably safe to assume that at any point in a paint job, my wet palette is a swampy bog. The colors mix together and they just all look like gray-brown eventually. My main goal here is to bring in brighter colors by mixing in some of the ivory white and moonbeam yellow to each section. I'm also trying not to just make a brighter version of the base color underneath. Because these colors harmonize so well together, we can add interesting color depth and modulation by altering our highlight colors a bit. And some of this is back and forth a bit. I actually felt that sometimes I went too bright and too desaturated for my highlights, so I just covered those up with a more saturated true tone to really see the cool colors in the scheme. When in doubt, don't mix in just your pure white or off-white as your highlight colors. I like to bring in colors like the reds, the ochres, and the yellows to my highlight to brighten them up and warm them out. Warm them out? It's not a thing. Today's video is brought to us by Bamboo Labs, and it is no secret at this point that I've been so impressed with this FDM printer that mine has been running nonstop. Now, I've been printing a lot of terrain lately, mostly for Mordheim and my D&D campaign, but lately I've been getting into printing sci-fi terrain for use in my Warhammer 40K local gaming group and for local tournaments. There's a lot to love about Bamboo Labs. Their software is free and incredibly easy to use. The A1 printer auto levels, it automatically calibrates, it uses vibration compensation algorithms, and has internal monitoring functions. Basically, it takes the steep learning curve that comes with 3D printing and throws it out the window. Oh, and it also has a print quality and speed comparable to the highest end printers on the market. I've not had a single print failure or clog. It is just smooth as butter every time I turn it on. I just love going out and looking for any awesome looking terrain piece for my games, not worrying that it would be too big or too complex to print because I know the Bamboo's got it covered. And as I'm out there looking at the countless number of Warhammer terrain features available to print, it's good to know that I don't need to change any settings, it's just gonna print right the first time. For example, this 40K terrain by Tinker Junkie comes in a lot of different styles and aesthetics, and not only does it look awesome, but it folds up for easy storage both in my own storage room or to store at the game store. So if there's anything out there that you can imagine to increase your immersion into the game or to make a scene for your miniatures to paint, then this thing can print it. So if you want a high quality printer that won the CNET 2024 Editor's Choice Award, then look no further than the Bamboo Labs A1 and A1 Mini. I've got links down in the video description so you can take advantage of their sales going on right now. I like the idea of our handsy horsey not being a singular color. The gradual transition of tones across his skin comes from both the light source ahead and to the left of the model, as well as just having some fun with skin variation across the beast. This keeps it more interesting and in tune with how Blanche didn't always paint things the way you'd expect him to. Like anytime I'm working up highlights, I get to a point where I'm happy with how it's looking, and then I take the highlights one step brighter. This is so important when painting at the miniature scale because the viewer isn't going to be under that same ideal paint station lighting that you're painting the model under. A good way to test if you've punched up your highlights bright enough is to take your miniature out into your garage or living room and take a look at it under those lights there. If it doesn't jump out at you, head back to the painting desk and punch it up with another layer of highlights. I'm keeping the backside of the model a little bit darker and a little bit colder in the choice of color. This helps me show the direction of the light source in the front, but it also allows me to mess with some of the other colors in the set. The deep, rich, blighted green was the color that I was most nervous about using when I had it on my palette. But when I started to use it in the deep, rich shadows on the cool side of the model, it really brought it to life, and it really felt like it fit far more than I had expected it to. And seeing that green in action really inspired me to try pushing some more accent colors in the set on other areas. It started to make me feel like there wasn't a lot of wrong choices I could make here. And just glazing faint versions of these colors into the shadows just felt too boring for me. So if we're going to use them, let's try to really punch them up and see how they affect the final product. And this is where fiery vermilion became my favorite color in the set. This thing is knock your socks off bright. It almost feels like there's a bit of fluorescent paint in it. It is so bold and punchy, and it really grabs your attention. And the other cool thing is it actually mixes really well with all the other colors in the set. I'm sure it mixes with plenty of other colors that aren't in this set. For example, if I mixed it with a little bit of the yellow and the off-white, it became this screaming reddish orange fire color that was really, really cool for a highlight. After futzing around with more colors around the model, I decided I needed to push the Blanche-esque warmth in key areas of the model. I realized that this piece isn't going to turn out as wildly warm as some of his most iconic works of art, but I wanted to be sure that it includes it in at least some select areas that I want to be the center of attention. The area of the guardsman's helmet, his left arm, his shoulder, all the way up to the horse's head, and then the flag on his spear are all key warm areas that actually create the shape of a triangle, which is pretty harmonious to look at. I didn't think about triangles when I was painting this part, but now I see it's a triangle, so I can claim that this was an artsy-fartsy decision. And even though his armor is colored a cold blue, by keeping some of that untouched and pushing the highlights from the light reflections to a really bright warm tone, we get a sense of how the light source is affecting that material. Now we do have some more details, effects, and the cold side of the model to paint, but this seems like a proper time to montage our way through it. Now that we've got our model done, I do want to crank out this base, but while we do that, I want to talk through my thoughts on this paint set as a whole and my experience painting this model. First of all, I'm just glad that this paint set exists and that John Blanche had a direct hand in creating it. I've tried to paint in his style before, using whatever colors I had that looked like they might work well, and overall, it did work pretty well. But it's the colors I didn't think of that the Army Painter included in this set that really tie this together. The midnight olive and dark greenish blue are prime examples of this. I wouldn't have thought of those tones in a million years, but they play a supporting cast role so perfectly, and I think it's the subtlety of these tones that really create the depth that this set needs. And in terms of the quality of the paints themselves, they're great, quite frankly. The new Fanatic range paints are awesome, and these are no different. Same with their second generation Speedpaints. I didn't once stop because the paint was acting weirdly or it wasn't working with me. I just got to focus on messing with color and not worrying about the paints. So I guess to look on the bright side, I'm glad that John worked with the Army Painter for this set instead of Games Workshop. And here is our final model. Honestly, these new Krieg models are so damn awesome and wonderful canvases for a Jean Blanche inspired paint job that the figure really helped me out a lot to make this paint job work. I really enjoyed this painting experience, and I'm honestly not just saying that. This was just so much fun. I could sit back, relax, futz around with a big paintbrush with fun colors because I knew the range had that harmony that I was going to look cool together. You know, it makes me wish there were more paint schemes in a box like this with unique colors that all harmonized well together. But I'm sure those smart people at paint companies have already thought of that, and there's going to be more things like this. But just like John himself, this is the first of its kind. So whether you decide to pick up this set or just do some Googling yourself to find an interesting and deep color scheme that you can work with, I do think that you should give messing with an in-depth color scheme a try. Taking the sometimes stressful paint decision-making process largely out of the equation opens you up to experimenting and growing as a painter, and that is always a good thing. Thanks a million for joining me today on Project Blanche Krieg. I had a lot of fun, and I hope you did too. If you did, please subscribe to the channel and like the video. It would mean a lot to me. Also, if you want to support the channel in another way, check out my link to the Patreon below. We've got some fun rewards as thank yous for supporting the channel over there. For example, I just started releasing videos on the Patreon that are long, unedited versions of my paint job, so you can see how I do each step brushstroke by brushstroke. I also set them to relaxing music, so if you have trouble sleeping at night, you could just keep them on. Don't worry, I'll be back before you know it with another new video. Just be sure that sometime between now and then, you find time in your day to slay the gray.